Hello and welcome to the easiest motion graphics class you'll ever take. I'll start off by giving you a bare bones introduction to Adobe After Effects, and then I'll walk you through how to create this loading icon animation. Can't wait to see the animations you create. For this class, you're going to need Adobe After Effects, Adobe Media Encoder to export. Class project is to follow along and create your own loading icon animation. You'll find a completed version of the project file on the Project and Resources page. Don't forget to post your project to the project gallery. Hello and welcome to the Introduction to After Effects portion of this class. I want to make it clear that creating this part of the lesson is not essential to the class project. If this is your first time inside Adobe After Effects, I really suggest watching this lesson all the way through before you even start animating. Then once you've watched this lesson all the way through, then we'll create our class project together. To get your screen looking like my screen, you can go to Window, Workspace, and select Default. Now we can click on the New Composition button to bring up our composition settings. In this field, we can choose a name for our composition. I'm going to type out Main. And for the purposes of this exercise, I'm going to choose a preset. I'm going to choose Social Media Landscape HD. This will give us a width of 1920 and a height of 1080, frame rate of 30. For the duration, I'm going to choose 500 frames. It's also worth noting that your display settings may be displayed as timecode instead of frames. To change this, all you need to do is go to File, Project Settings, Time Display Style. I prefer to have mine set as frames, but changing this isn't necessary for the class project. In this field, we can choose a background color. I'll stick with a white background. We can click OK, and we'll head into our new composition. Now that we're in our new composition, we can head up to the top of the screen, and on this icon here is where we'll find our shape tools. When you click on it, you can see a whole list of shapes that you can create. For this demonstration, I'm going to select the rectangle tool. Now in our composition panel, I'll hold the Shift key and drag with my mouse to create a perfect square. Now we'll head over to our layer panel where we can select our new layer, and we can press the Enter key to give it a name. I'm going to name mine Square 1. With our layer selected, we'll head up to the top of the screen and we'll click on this icon to get the Pan Behind tool. What we can do with this tool is change our anchor point on our layer. And what the anchor point is essentially a point on our layer where our layer animates from. This will make more sense later when you go to animate. Here's a quick tip for centering your anchor point. If you have snapping enabled, it'll make it easier for you to snap your anchor point into the center or the sides of your object. I'll give an example by bringing up the rotation property by pressing R. And as you can see, as we rotate the square, it rotates from the center of the layer because that's where our anchor point is. I'm going to undo that with Ctrl Z. And now I'm going to bring up the position by pressing the P key. We can move the square using the X-axis or the Y-axis, just by dragging these numbers. Alternatively, you can drag the square with your mouse. I'm going to press Ctrl Z to undo that. Now I'm going to duplicate our square layer with Ctrl D. I'm going to move its Y position. I'll do that again. Move it down with the Y position. Duplicate a third time. Again, we'll move it. So now we have 4 squares. I'm just going to space them out a little bit better. Doesn't have to be perfect, but I do want it to look nice. Now that we have 4 squares displayed, I'm going to show you how you would go about animating. But first I'm going to rearrange the layers so that they're in order, 1 to 4. There we go. So how would we go about animating? Well, first we're going to want to make sure that our playhead is at the beginning of our timeline. Over here you'll find your playhead. And over here is where you'll find which frame number you're on the timeline. Now we can select all our layers in the layer panel, and we'll press these stopwatches. This will place keyframes onto our timeline. Now we can drag our playhead on the timeline to move over. We'll move over to maybe 30 frames on the timeline, which is exactly 1 second. And we can hold down the Shift key while we drag our boxes. This will help us drag them in a straight line. We'll drag them over to the other side of the screen, maybe to around here. And as you can see, this places new keyframes on the timeline automatically. I'm going to shrink my preview area by pressing N on the keyboard. Alternatively, you can just drag the end of your preview area. We will be learning more about the work area later on in the export lesson. And now we'll press the space bar to preview our animation. By selecting our keyframes and pressing the F9 key, this will add what we call an easy ease. And what an easy ease is it automatically adds a smooth in, smooth out animation to our keyframes. We'll head inside the graph editor to explore this further, and I'll show you how you can animate your keyframes differently by using the speed graph. To get into the graph editor, we'll select the 2 keyframes for square 1, and we'll press this icon here, which is the graph editor icon. And once we're inside there, we have to make sure that we're on the speed graph, because there's the speed graph and the value graph. For this demonstration, I'm going to show you the speed graph because I find it's a much easier concept to understand for beginners. So this here is what our graph editor should look like on the default ease. If it doesn't look like this, that means you're probably on the value graph and you need to switch to the speed graph. Currently, all our layers have the default ease applied to them. We're going to leave our square 1 at the default ease, so we'll head out of the graph editor by pressing the icon, and we'll go to our square number 2 layer, select the keyframes, head inside the graph editor again. Now we're looking at the keyframes for the second square. What we're going to do is we're going to drag the handles into the middle, and we'll preview and see how this affects the animation. As you can see, there's quite the difference. Slow beginning, gets fast in the middle, and then slow ending. Now we're going to exit the graph editor. We'll select the keyframes for our square 3, head back into the graph editor, and for this one we're going to drag our handles to the left. As you can see, it's a fast start, slow ending. Now we're going to do the same thing for our square number 4. Exit the graph editor, select the keyframes, head back into the graph editor, and this one we're going to drag the keyframes to the right. We'll preview. Now our 4th square has a slow start and fast ending. Now I'm going to show you how to animate some other properties. I think we'll start with the rotation property because we've already touched upon it earlier. We'll select all our layers, press R to bring up the rotation. We'll select all our layers, press the stopwatches for the rotation property. Now we'll move to our second position keyframes. We'll select all our layers again. And in this field here, we'll type 360 for 360 degrees. Alternatively, you can type 1 into this field, meaning one full 360 degree rotation. There we go. Now all of our squares have a rotation on them. Now we're going to go through each one and press F9 to easy ease the keyframes. And we're going to do the same thing that we did for our position animations. We're going to animate each square differently using the speed graph. We're going to keep square 1 at the default. Now we'll select square 2's keyframes. We'll head into the graph editor. Drag these handles to the middle. Now we'll go to the third square, select the keyframes, go to the graph editor. We'll drag these ones to the left. Now we'll go to our fourth. Head in the graph editor. And we'll drag these handles to the right. Now let's preview our animation. The next property I'm going to animate is the scale. Again, we'll select all our layers. To bring up the scale property, we can press the S key. Once again, at the beginning of the timeline, with our layers selected, we'll press the stopwatch for the scale. Then we can change the scale value to 0%. We'll move over maybe halfway through our animation, frame 15. Again, select all our layers. We'll type in 100% with our layer selected. So now halfway through our animation, our boxes scale in. We'll go through our layers one by one and press F9 to add some easy ease to our scale animations. And for the scale animation, I think the default ease is good enough. The last property we're going to animate is the opacity property. We'll select all our layers again, press T on the keyboard to bring up the opacity property. At the beginning of the timeline, we'll press the stopwatch, type in 0%. For the opacity animation, I think I'm just going to go to frame 10 on the timeline. We'll type in 100%. And for the opacity animation, I don't think we need to add any easy ease. We'll just leave it as it is. So what was the point of this exercise? Well, 90% of the time when you're animating in Adobe After Effects, you're going to be animating the position, scale, rotation, or the opacity. Now you have a basic understanding how to animate. Of course, the software gets way more complex the deeper you dive into it, but knowing how to animate these 4 properties will get you a good head start. Now I'm going to show you some more things you're going to need to know for the class project. The first thing I quickly want to show you is the pen tool, which works essentially the same way as the shape tools, except you draw your shape with the pen. And you can animate it the same way that we animated the shape tool. Now let's head to the type tool, because we're going to need to know how to use this for our class project. We can find our type tool up here right beside the pen tool. We'll click on the icon. Now we'll type out some text. First things first, we'll align it to the center of the composition with the Align panel. Over here in the text panel is where we can change our properties. We can change our fill color here. Increase or decrease the size of our text. The paragraph menu essentially changes where the anchor point is for our text layer. We learned a little bit about what an anchor point is earlier. Again, I'll align it to the center of the composition. Over here is where we can change our font. For the class project, I'm going to be using the Monsterrat font, but you can use any font you would like. This field here, we can change the kerning of our text, which is the space in between the letters. We can add or take away our stroke, change our stroke color. Here we can increase or decrease the stroke width. That's essentially all I want to show you for the type tool. Another thing we'll be animating in this class project is something called a trim path. It essentially allows you to animate the stroke of a layer. To find it, we can toggle down our layer, go to Add, Trim Path. Down here we'll go to the Trim Path menu, and by changing the end and start values we can animate our stroke. Now I'm going to untoggle the layer. Now I'm going to show you what an expression is. An expression is essentially a line of code that will make our job a lot easier. We'll bring up the position by pressing P, and by holding the Alt key and pressing on a stopwatch, this is how you can add an expression. Over here in this field is where we can type our expressions. And in our class project, we're going to be using something called the loop out expression. This is how you type it out. And what this expression is going to allow us to do is loop our animation over and over again. You'll see how it works later when we create our class project. And one final thing that we're going to need to know how to do for our class project is create a pre-composition. To create a pre-comp, we can right-click, go to Pre-compose, make sure all attributes moved to the new composition is selected. Up here we can name our pre-composition. And what a pre-composition does is it creates a new composition with the layers that we selected to create our pre-comp with. We could head into our new composition by clicking on it. As you can see, our new composition is now listed up in our layer panels. To get back to our main composition, we can go back here, or we can find it up here. And that pretty much concludes the introduction to After Effects portion of this class. I hope you now have a very basic understanding of how the software works. Yes, I know it was a very basic and bare bones introduction, and you probably still have many questions about how the software works. It's a very complex program and takes years and years to completely master. But don't worry, you should have enough information to complete the class project, which I'll walk you through step by step, beginning in the next lesson. Just wanted to create a quick bonus lesson for students that may want to export their animation without a background. You might want to do this if you want to use your icon in future compositions. First things first, we'll have to delete our background. Then we'll head over to this icon here, toggle transparency grid. When you see the checkered icon, you know it's working. We'll head over to File, Export, and this time we're going to add it to our render queue. We can leave our render settings as they are. We're going to want to go into the output module. By default, the format is set to QuickTime. We're going to want to go to Channels. You'll notice that the setting that we want, which is RGB plus alpha, is not available on the QuickTime option. So we're going to have to choose a format that will allow us to use the alpha channel. I usually like to export with AVI. Now we'll go back to the Channels menu, select RGB plus alpha, click on OK. We can click here to name our export and where we're going to export it. Click Save, and then we'll go up here to render. Now it should be exported without a background, and now you can use it in future compositions. Now that we have our main animation completed, we're going to want it to loop out throughout the duration of the timeline. We'll expand our work area. What we're going to do is we're going to create a pre-comp of our animation, and then we'll use the time remap tool to add our loop out expression. So let's select our 3 layers, right click, go to pre-compose, make sure move all attributes into a new composition is selected. We'll name it loading circle. Press enter. Now we have our pre-comp. Now we can right click on our pre-comp, go to time, enable time remapping. Now we're going to want to go to the last frame with animation on it, which in our case is frame 45. We'll press the keyframe button to put a new keyframe on our time remap. Now this is the most important step of this lesson. Make sure you delete the last keyframe for the time remap on the timeline, or else the loop out expression won't work properly. So once we've done that, now we can add our expression. We'll hold the Alt key and press our stopwatch. That's how we add expressions. And we'll type in our expression into this field. Loop out. Now let's see what happens when we preview. There we go, we have a looping animation. Now let's export our animation to share in the project gallery. What you're going to want to keep in mind is that your work area is the area of the video that you're going to be exporting. You can change your work area by dragging the handles or pressing the B and end keys to change the start and end of the work area. You can also drag the work area on the timeline. For my export, I want it to be a perfect loop. I'm going to have to find a moment on the timeline where the animation ends and before it begins. In my case, that's at 6 seconds. So I'm going to zoom in here and make sure that the end of my work area ends at exactly 6 seconds. Now I'll preview the animation to make sure it's a perfect loop. There we go. It's looping perfectly. So now I can go to File, Export, Add to Adobe Media Encoder. Now once Media Encoder is open, we can select a preset from all these presets that Adobe has created for us. Let's select YouTube 1080p Full HD. We can click here to name our file and where we're going to export it. Now up here we'll press the green arrow to export our animation. Now let's create the loading text animation. We'll go up to our text tool. We'll type out some text. We can center it to the center of the composition with the Align panel. We want our loading text animation to be the same length as our circle animation. So we'll bring up our keyframes as a guide. Remember to press U. We'll bring up the opacity of the loading text by pressing T. At the beginning of the timeline, we'll press the stopwatch to put a keyframe. Then we'll move to the end of our circle animation, which is frame 45. And we'll copy and paste our first keyframe. Now let's move back about halfway through. Let's say frame 22. And we'll change the opacity of our loading text to 25. Now let's select the 3 keyframes, press F9 to easy ease, and there we go. Very simple, very basic animation. Now I'm going to refine my animation by just changing the size of the circle. We can toggle down circle, ellipse 1, ellipse path 1, and I'm going to change the size to 200 by 200. We'll have to do the same thing for our shadow layer. Contents, ellipse 1, ellipse path 1, change the size to 200. I'm also going to edit the loading animation. I'm going to turn on my grid bring up the position for the loading text, and I'll move the Y position. There, I think that looks better. I think I'm also going to remove the kerning from the loading text. We do that by selecting our text, going over to our text panel. I'm going to change it to 100. I think that looks a lot better. I might also change the size of my text, turn it down to 45 pixels. I'm also going to add a background. Go up to Layer, New Solid, and I'm going to choose a very light blue color. Make sure it's at the bottom of our layer panel. There we go. Toggle down our circle layer. Go to Add Trim Path. Toggle down Trim Path 1. We'll change our end to 0. Press the stopwatch to put a keyframe. We'll move over 30 frames on the timeline. Change our end to 100%. Now let's move back to around frame 15. We'll press the stopwatch for our start. Then we'll move over 30 frames. And we'll change our start value to 100. This is what we have so far. Now we'll select all our keyframes. Press F9 to add some easy ease, just like we learned in the introduction video. For this animation, I think the default easy ease is good enough. You can head into the graph editor and edit the speed graph however you would like. I'm going to keep mine at the default. I'll toggle down stroke 1. Change the line cap to round cap. There, I think that makes it look a little bit better. Untoggle the layer. Now I'm going to create the shadow. I'll duplicate the circle layer with Ctrl D. Press Enter to rename the layer. Rename it Shadow. Move it under the circle layer. Press U to bring up our keyframes. And we can press the stopwatch to remove any keyframes because we don't want any animation. Change the end to 100 to bring our circle back. Now we can press T to bring up the opacity. Turn the opacity down to 50%. And there we go. We've created the shadow for our loading animation. Now let's start creating our loading animation. If your screen doesn't look like mine, remember you can go to Workspace and select Default. That should get your screen looking something like this. I'm going to click on the New Composition button. We can name our composition. I'm going to name mine Main. I'm going to keep it on this preset, Social Media Landscape HD, 1920 by 1080, 30 frames a second. The duration, I'm going to keep it at 600 frames. We can go into our background color, and I'm going to select a white background. Click OK. I'm going to select my preview screen to fit. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go up to our Shape tool, select the Ellipse tool. Now holding the Shift key, I'm going to drag out my shape to create a circle. We can toggle down Ellipse 1, Ellipse Path 1. I'm going to round mine off to 400. I'm going to rename the layer to circle. Remember to press enter to rename a layer. We can go up to our anchor point tool, center our anchor point. Now I'll toggle down my align panel, center the circle to the middle of the composition. Now I'm going to toggle down the circle, toggle down fill 1. We could actually just delete our fill 1 by pressing the delete key. Now I'm going to toggle down stroke 1, change the stroke color to black. Besides stroke width, we could try out 10. Doesn't look quite thick enough. I'm going to try out 20. There, that looks better. Congratulations and thank you for taking my course. Now you can post your projects to the project gallery so everyone can see the animations you created. If you would like to learn more about motion graphics and Adobe After Effects, I suggest checking out some of my other classes. I have 5 other classes aimed at beginners where you can learn about how to add texture, color theory, essential text animations, and a whole lot of other tips and tricks. Can't wait to see the animations you create.